The cold wind swept across the silent landing field on planet Asterion. The night sky was filled with silver stars and broken ships rested under the pale light. Captain Reed Lawson, a human pilot, walked alone near his small cargo shuttle. He had come here for trade, but the war had ended everything. The towns were empty, and most people had fled to safer colonies. The world felt forgotten. He checked the engines, wiped the dust from his hands, and looked toward the horizon. Snow began to fall again, covering the metal ground in white. Then he saw movement. Far away, 3 shadows walked slowly through the snow. At first, Reed thought they were scavengers or lost travelers. But as the figures came closer, he saw a woman holding 2 small children. The woman looked weak and tired. Her clothes were torn and covered in frost. She moved carefully as if every step hurt. The 2 children clung to her sides, shivering in the cold. Reed's heart tightened. He could tell right away that they were not human. The woman's skin had a soft blue-gray tone that shimmered under the light. Her hair was dark and long, tangled by the wind. Her eyes glowed faintly like silver glass. The children had the same strange glow, but their faces were full of fear. When they reached him, the woman stopped and tried to bow. Her voice was soft and shaking. "Please, human, we need help," she said. "My children are hungry. We have nowhere to go." Reed stepped forward and took off his coat. "Come inside," he said quietly. "It's too cold out here." The woman hesitated for a moment. She looked at him with frightened eyes, then nodded slowly. He led them inside the shuttle. The air inside was warmer. The children curled near the small heater, their hands pressed together. Reed gave them dry food packs and water. They ate in silence, afraid to look up. He watched them quietly. The woman looked exhausted, her face pale, her hands trembling as she held the food. She didn't eat until both children finished. Reed saw the way she looked at them with deep love and pain. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The woman looked up. "Lyra," she said. "These are my children." "Ina and Taro," Reed nodded. "I'm Reed. You can rest here tonight." She lowered her head. "Thank you, Captain Reed." He poured hot water into a small cup and handed it to her. She held it carefully, as if it were a treasure. For a while no one spoke. Only the soft hum of the ship filled the silence. Finally, Reed asked, "Where were you coming from?" Lyra's eyes darkened. "Our city was destroyed when the war ended," she said slowly. "My husband fought in the defense. He died when the sky burned. Since then, we have walked from place to place looking for somewhere safe. The human stations refused us. They say our kind should go back to our own world, but it no longer exists." Reed listened quietly. He knew how cruel the border colonies had become. After the war between humans and alien races, trust had vanished. Refugees were treated like criminals. "I'm sorry," he said. Lyra smiled sadly. "Don't be. You are the first human who has spoken kindly to me." Reed looked away. He wasn't sure how to answer. For years he had lived alone, flying from one world to another, trading small cargo. Loneliness had become a habit. But now, seeing this woman and her children sitting in his ship, he felt something stir inside him, something he had not felt in a long time. As the heater hummed, the children began to fall asleep. Lyra gently covered them with a blanket. Then she sat near the small light, her hands resting on her knees. Reed watched her. The marks of hardship were clear on her face, but there was also strength there. Even with nothing left, she tried to stay calm for her children. "You can stay here until morning," Reed said. "Then I'll take you to the nearest colony. Maybe they can help." She shook her head slowly. "We went there already. They sent us away. They said only humans can live inside the walls. They told me to ask someone to take me in." Reed frowned. "Take you in?" Lyra's voice trembled. "Yes, they said if I could find a human man to accept me, they might allow us to stay. But no one wanted to look at me. I begged for food, but they laughed." She stopped speaking. Her eyes were full of tears, but she wiped them away before they fell. Reed felt a heavy ache in his chest. He had seen many desperate people after the war, but there was something different about her. She wasn't only trying to survive, she was trying to protect her children's dignity. He stood and walked to the storage box, bringing another blanket. "You should rest," he said softly. Lyra looked up at him. "Captain Reed," she said quietly. "Why are you kind to us?" He paused. "Because I remember what it feels like to lose everything." She stared at him for a long moment, as if trying to understand his pain. Then she whispered, "Then maybe you understand me." Reed nodded once. When the children were asleep, Lyra sat near the heater again. The silence between them was long, filled only with the sound of the wind outside the ship. Finally she spoke again, her voice small and careful. "Human man," she said, "I have nothing to give, but I can work, clean, cook. I can keep your home warm. I can raise my children quietly. If you will let me stay, if you will accept me, I can be your wife." Reed froze. He looked at her in disbelief. "Lyra, you don't know me." "I don't need to," she whispered. "I know kindness when I see it. You didn't close the door. You didn't turn us away." Reed felt his heart beat heavy in his chest. He could see she wasn't begging for herself. She was begging for her children's future. He ran a hand through his hair and sighed. "Lyra, you don't have to say that. You and your children will be safe here tonight. Tomorrow I'll think of something." She lowered her eyes. "If you send us away, we will have nowhere to go," she said softly. "But even if you don't choose us, I will still thank you for this night." Her words hit him deeply. For years he had drifted without purpose, carrying old memories and empty cargo. Now for the first time he saw a reason to stop. Reed looked at the sleeping children again. Ina's hand rested on her brother's shoulder. Their faces were peaceful, as if they finally felt safe. Lyra watched them too, her face calm but full of worry. "You should sleep," he said finally. "We'll talk in the morning," she nodded. "Good night, Captain Reed." He turned off the main lights and sat in the pilot seat, staring out the window. Snow fell across the landing pad, shining in the pale moonlight. Inside the small ship, warmth slowly filled the air. Reed closed his eyes, but sleep did not come easily. He kept hearing her words, her quiet voice asking for a home. He remembered his wife long gone and the life he had lost. And then he thought of Lyra and her children, walking alone through the frozen night, still brave enough to hope that someone would help them. When he finally opened his eyes, the storm outside had grown stronger. He stood, checked the heater, and gently placed another blanket over the children. Lyra stirred slightly, whispering something in her sleep, a word from her own language that he didn't understand but somehow felt. It sounded like hope. Reed sat back down and looked around the small cabin. He realized how empty it had been before tonight. Now there was life in it, quiet breathing, the warmth of others, the soft sound of dreams. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but deep inside he felt a promise forming. He wouldn't abandon them. Not after this. Outside, the storm howled across the barren planet, but inside the human ship, for the first time in a long while, there was warmth and there was peace. The morning on Asterion came with a dull gray sky. The snowstorm had slowed, leaving the ground soft and white. Captain Reed Lawson opened his eyes slowly, feeling the cold air against his face. The heater had gone quiet during the night and frost had begun to form on the ship's window. He sat up and looked toward the back of the cabin. Lyra and her children were still asleep, wrapped under the blankets he had given them. The small boy, Taro, had rolled close to his mother's arm, and Ina, the older sister, slept holding her brother's hand. For a long moment, Reed just watched them. He could hardly remember the last time he had seen anyone sleep so peacefully inside his ship. It made the small metal room feel less empty. He took a quiet breath and went to prepare the morning rations. When the smell of heated food filled the air, Lyra slowly opened her eyes. She looked confused at first, then remembered where she was. When she saw Reed standing near the small cooker, she quickly sat up. "Good morning," she said softly. "Morning," he replied. "Food's ready. It's not much, but it'll help." The two children woke up when they smelled the warm food. They rubbed their eyes and smiled shyly at Reed when he gave them plates. Ina whispered a thank you and Taro only nodded, but there was warmth in their eyes now, not fear. Reed sat across from them, eating quietly. After a while, he looked at Lyra. "I was thinking," he said slowly, "I have to travel to the southern colony today. They might have better conditions for families. I can take you there." Lyra lowered her eyes. "If they let us in," she said softly. "Last time they said they would not take any more of my kind." Reed nodded. "Maybe they'll listen if I speak for you." Her eyes lifted with faint hope. "You would do that?" "Yeah," he said. "You and your kids deserve a chance." Her lips trembled with emotion. "You are a good man, Captain Reed." He didn't answer, but something inside him felt warm at her words. They left the landing pad a few hours later. The shuttle rose through the thin clouds, cutting across the icy landscape. Lyra and the children sat quietly behind him, watching the sky through the window. Reed could feel their presence behind him. For years he had flown alone, hearing nothing but the hum of the engines. Now there was soft laughter from the children and the gentle voice of Lyra calming them. It changed the silence of the ship. After several hours, the shuttle reached the Southern Colony outpost, a small base built on metal pillars, surrounded by high fences and watchtowers. Reed landed near the outer checkpoint. 2 guards walked toward him, their rifles slung across their backs. They wore gray uniforms marked with the Human Federation symbol. Reed stepped out and greeted them. "I'm here for trade," he said, showing his identification card. The taller guard nodded but looked past him toward the shuttle. "Who's with you?" Reed hesitated. "Refugees," he said finally. "A widow and 2 children. They need a place to stay." The guard frowned. "Refugees? Alien kind?" Reed's voice stayed calm. "Yes, they're harmless. Just need food and shelter." The second guard laughed quietly. "We don't take them in here anymore. Orders from command. Too many problems after the war." Reed's jaw tightened. "They're not soldiers. They're just a mother and her kids." The taller guard shook his head. "I'm sorry, Captain, but we can't help. You'd better take them somewhere else before the patrol sees." Reed's patience broke. "They're freezing out there. You have empty rooms, don't you?" "Orders are orders," the guard said firmly. "Take them away." Reed clenched his fists but didn't argue further. He turned and walked back to the ship. Lyra was standing in the doorway holding Ina and Taro close. She had heard everything. "They won't let us stay," she said quietly. Reed nodded. "No, but we'll find another way." Her eyes softened. "You should not anger your people for us." "I'm not doing this for your kind," Reed said softly. "I'm doing this because it's right." She didn't know how to answer. Her eyes shimmered and she bowed her head. They left the colony behind and flew for several hours toward the western ridge. Reed decided to stop near the ruins of an old mining settlement, where he had once lived during his early years as a pilot. It wasn't much, just a few abandoned houses, a water tank, and a small power generator. But it was shelter. When they landed, snow had begun to fall again. Reed opened the doors and led them into one of the buildings. The roof was half broken, but there was enough space to keep the cold out. He started the generator and weak light filled the room. Lyra looked around with surprise. "You lived here before?" "A long time ago," Reed said. "Back when this place was alive. Now it's just ruins, but we can stay for a while." The children explored the room carefully. Taro found an old chair and sat in it, pretending it was a pilot seat. Ina picked up a metal cup and laughed softly for the first time. Reed watched them and smiled without realizing it. Lyra turned to him. "You have done more than enough, Captain Reed. We do not deserve so much kindness." He looked at her seriously. "No one deserves to be left to die, Lyra." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she whispered, "If my husband were alive, he would have thanked you too. He believed humans and our people could live in peace." Reed nodded. Maybe he was right. Maybe that's what we're trying to prove. That night, they made a small fire inside the old metal stove. Lyra cooked what little food they had left. Reed watched as she moved quietly, carefully serving the children first. There was something graceful about the way she worked, even in such a broken place. After dinner, the children curled up near the fire and fell asleep quickly. Lyra sat down across from Reed. The flickering light reflected in her silver eyes. "Captain Reed," she said softly, "why are you still helping us? You could have left us many times." Reed thought for a long moment. "I guess I'm tired of losing people," he said quietly. "You remind me of what I lost, family, love, a reason to care." Lyra looked down, her hands folded together. "You have a good heart. My people would call you a light bearer." Reed smiled faintly. "I'm no light. I'm just trying to make things right." Silence filled the room again, soft and peaceful. Outside, the storm howled, but inside there was warmth. As the days passed, Reed repaired the old building, using parts from his ship and scrap metal from the mines. Lyra helped by cleaning and cooking, while the children gathered small supplies from nearby ruins. Slowly, the empty place began to feel like a home. One afternoon, Reed returned from gathering fuel and found the children playing outside. They had built a small snow fort. Lyra stood near them, watching with a gentle smile. When she saw Reed, her eyes lit up. "You are back safe," she said with relief. "Always," he said, smiling. She looked at him quietly for a moment, her expression soft. "They laugh again because of you," she said. "You gave them something I could not, hope." Reed looked at the children, then back at her. "Hope is something we both gave them," he said. That evening, as the sun set over the icy hills, Reed sat outside the cabin, staring at the orange glow in the sky. Lyra came and sat beside him. For a while neither spoke. The world was silent except for the sound of the wind. Then Lyra said softly, "Captain Reed, when I asked you before to accept me as your wife, I did not mean to burden you, but I want you to know I meant it. Not because I need protection, but because I see goodness in you. I see a man who still believes in life." Reed turned his head slowly. Her eyes were calm and sincere. He took a breath and said quietly, "Lyra, I'm not sure what I deserve anymore, but I can promise this. You and your children will never be alone again." She looked at him for a long moment, then lowered her gaze with a faint smile. "That is enough," she whispered. They sat together in silence, watching the stars appear one by one above the frozen land. Reed didn't know what future awaited them, but for the first time in years he wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The alien widow and her children had brought something back into his life, something he thought he had lost forever: warmth, purpose, and maybe, just maybe, the beginning of a family again. Days passed quietly in the frozen valley. The old mining settlement slowly came alive again under Reed's care. He fixed the roof, restored the heater, and brought light to the empty rooms. Lyra and her children cleaned every corner and made it warm with small touches. Cloth over the tables, flowers made from colored scraps, soft laughter echoing through the quiet space. For the first time in years, Reed felt like he was part of something real again. Every morning he left early to collect supplies or parts from the wrecked towns. Sometimes he traded small items with traveling scavengers. Other times he hunted for frozen berries and firewood. Lyra waited for him with food ready and a smile when he returned. The children ran to greet him every evening, calling his name in excitement. That simple joy made his long days worth it. One cold morning, as Reed prepared to leave again, Lyra stood by the door. Her blue-gray skin glowed faintly in the early light. "You work too much," she said softly. "You should rest." Reed smiled a little. "I'm fine. Just need to make sure we have enough before another storm comes." "I can help," she said. "I am not weak anymore." He looked at her. She had indeed changed since the night they met. Stronger, healthier, her eyes brighter. "You already help enough," he said kindly. "Stay with the children. I'll be back by sundown." She nodded, though worry lingered in her eyes. "Be careful, Captain Reed." He gave a small nod and left, walking through the snowy plain toward his ship. The day was clear, the wind soft. But as he reached the ridge, he noticed smoke rising from the east, thin black trails cutting across the sky. His heart tightened. That was no ordinary campfire. It was a patrol signal. Reed climbed the rocks carefully and looked through his old binoculars. In the distance, he saw 2 Federation patrol vehicles moving slowly across the snow. Soldiers in gray uniforms were scanning the ground, searching for something or someone. He felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the weather. If they found the settlement, they would arrest Lyra and her children. Refugee aliens were still forbidden in human colonies. Some were sent to labor camps. He couldn't let that happen. Reed hurried back down the hill and returned to the cabin as fast as he could. When Lyra saw his face, her expression turned fearful. "What happened?" she asked quickly. "Patrols," Reed said. "They're nearby. We need to hide." The children froze, their eyes wide. Reed started gathering their supplies: food, blankets, water. Lyra helped him, her hands shaking slightly. "Will they hurt us?" she whispered. "I won't let them," he said firmly. They left the cabin and moved toward the cliffs behind the settlement. There was an old cave hidden between 2 large rocks. Reed had used it once as a storage place years ago. Now it would serve as their shelter. Inside, the cave was dark but dry. He set up a small light and told the children to stay quiet. From the entrance, Reed could see the patrol vehicles approaching the settlement. The engines roared through the still air. Soldiers got out, searching the ruins. They walked around the cabin, kicking open doors, checking footprints. Reed watched silently, his hand resting on his old blaster, though he hoped he wouldn't need to use it. After some time, the soldiers found the fire pit near the cabin. One of them called out, and they began following the trail of footprints that led toward the cliffs. Reed's heart raced. They were coming closer. He turned to Lyra. "Stay here with the kids. Don't move no matter what happens." She grabbed his arm. "You can't go out there. They will catch you too." Reed looked into her frightened eyes. "If I don't stop them, they'll find you. I'll draw them away." Before she could argue, he slipped out of the cave and moved down the slope. He took a long path around the rocks, stepping where the snow was soft enough to hide his tracks. When he reached a lower ridge, he picked up a piece of metal and threw it toward the far end of the valley. The noise echoed loudly. The soldiers turned their attention toward the sound. "There," one of them shouted. "Someone's there." Reed watched them split into groups, moving toward the noise. He waited for the right moment, then ran toward the shuttle he had parked in the distance. The soldiers spotted movement and began firing warning shots, but Reed didn't stop. He jumped inside the ship, started the engines, and lifted off. The shuttle rose into the air, snow flying in all directions. The patrol vehicles turned their weapons upward and shot bright tracers into the sky. Reed pushed the engines hard, flying low toward the southern hills. He could hear the alarm through the radio, but he didn't care. He just needed to draw them far enough away. For nearly an hour, the chase went on through the white landscape. Reed's ship was old, but he knew how to handle it better than anyone. Finally, he lost them among the mountain ridges. He landed behind a cliff and powered down the engines to hide from scanners. The ship hissed and went silent. He sat there for a moment, breathing heavily, his hands shaking from the tension. Then he smiled weakly. "Still got it," he whispered. But his thoughts went back to Lyra and the children waiting in the cave. He couldn't leave them alone too long. He gathered his strength and began walking back through the snow, his boots sinking deep into the frozen ground. By the time he reached the cave, night had fallen. Inside, Lyra and the children were sitting close together under blankets. When they saw him, Ina cried out, "Captain Reed," and ran to him. Taro followed, laughing with relief. Lyra stood and covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "You came back," she said softly. I thought they took you." Reed knelt and hugged the children, then looked up at her. "I told you I wouldn't leave." She came closer, her voice trembling. "You risked your life for us." He smiled faintly. "That's what family does." She stared at him, unable to speak. Then she lowered her eyes and whispered, "Then we are your family now." They stayed in the cave that night, listening to the wind. The children slept between them, and Reed sat awake for a long time, watching the small light flicker against the walls. Lyra was quiet beside him. After a while, she spoke softly. "Captain Reed, when I first asked you to accept me, I was only thinking of survival. But now I see you differently. You are kind, brave, and full of heart. My husband was a soldier, but even he never risked himself like you did." Reed shook his head. "I just did what anyone should do." "Not anyone," she said. "Only someone who still believes in good." He turned his head and looked at her. The light reflected in her silver eyes, and for the first time, he saw not just a refugee woman, but someone strong and full of quiet beauty. She had lost everything, yet she stood unbroken. He smiled slightly. "Maybe we both needed saving," he said softly. Lyra's lips curved into a small, gentle smile. "Maybe we did." Outside, the snowstorm grew stronger again, but inside the cave there was peace. Reed lay down beside the children and closed his eyes. He could hear Lyra humming softly in her native language, a lullaby, slow and beautiful. It was a sound that felt like warmth after years of silence. When morning came, the storm had passed. The sun rose over the white hills, painting everything in gold. Reed stepped outside the cave and looked at the wide horizon. For the first time in many years, he felt a reason to stay somewhere. Behind him, Lyra appeared holding Ina and Taro's hands. "Where will we go now?" she asked quietly. Reed looked at her, then at the open sky. "Wherever peace takes us," he said. "We'll build our own home. No more running." Lyra's eyes softened. "Together?" He nodded. "Together," she smiled, the morning light touching her face. For a moment, Reed forgot the cold and the fear. He saw only hope, strong, real and alive. The human man, the alien widow, and her children stood at the mouth of the cave, looking toward the rising sun. The world had been cruel to them, but they had found something greater than survival. They had found trust. And as the wind carried the sound of the distant sky, Reed knew he would protect them for as long as he lived. The morning sun rose bright over the frozen land. For the first time in many weeks, the sky was clear. The snow sparkled under the light and a thin layer of mist hung over the mountains. Reed stood outside the cave looking toward the horizon. The cold air filled his lungs, but it didn't feel bitter anymore. It felt clean, like a new beginning. Behind him, Lyra and the children were waking up. He heard their soft voices and the quiet laughter of Taro as he tried to chase a small light bug near the cave entrance. Ina helped her mother fold the blankets, humming a tune she had learned from Reed. When Reed walked back inside, Lyra looked up and smiled. "The storm is gone," she said softly. "It feels like a new day." He nodded. "It is. We can't stay here forever, but maybe we can find a place where no one will chase us." Lyra's eyes shone faintly in the light. "A place for peace," she whispered. Reed sat down and opened the old map from his pack. "There's a valley south of here," he said. "Used to be a farming colony before the war. It's empty now, but the land is still good. There's water, trees, and no patrol routes. We could start again there." Lyra moved closer to look at the map. Her hand brushed against his. "You mean we could build a home?" He looked at her and smiled gently. "Yes, a real home." Her voice trembled a little. "No running, no hiding?" "No more running," he said quietly. The decision was made. They gathered their few belongings, blankets, tools, some food, and began the journey south. Reed carried Taro on his shoulders when he got tired, and Lyra held Ina's hand as they crossed the long snowfields. The days were hard, but Reed kept the group moving with quiet strength. Lyra walked beside him, her step steady, her eyes full of hope. After several days, they reached the valley Reed had spoken of. The land stretched wide between two mountain ridges, filled with frozen grass and the remains of old buildings. A stream ran through the middle, half covered with ice but still flowing. The sight took their breath away. "This place," Lyra whispered. "It feels alive." Reed smiled. "It's perfect." They built their shelter near the stream using parts from Reed's shuttle and the old structures that still stood. Reed repaired the walls while Lyra cleaned and arranged the inside. The children gathered stones for the fire pit and painted small pictures on the walls with melted snow and earth dust. Bit by bit, the empty valley began to feel like home. Days passed into weeks. Reed worked hard every day, cutting wood, fixing tools, and repairing the power unit he had salvaged. Lyra planted small seeds she had kept hidden in her old pouch, plants from her home world. She said they would grow even in cold air if cared for with warmth. Every evening, they sat together near the fire. The children told stories or sang songs. Reed often smiled quietly, watching them. He didn't speak much, but his eyes showed peace. One evening, when the stars shone bright, Reed sat outside the cabin looking at the night sky. Lyra came out quietly and stood beside him. The cold air brushed her hair and the firelight touched her face. "You built this place for us," she said softly. "You gave us life again." Reed shook his head gently. "We built it together. You gave me something too." She looked at him with curiosity. "What did I give you?" He turned toward her. "A reason to stop running from my own past." She smiled faintly, but her eyes were full of emotion. "You were alone too long," she said. "Now you are not." He nodded slowly. "No, I'm not." They stood in silence for a while, listening to the soft whisper of the wind through the grass. Then Reed spoke again. "You once asked me to accept you as my wife. I didn't give you an answer then because I was afraid of failing again, of losing someone I cared about. But now I understand something." Lyra looked up at him, her silver eyes shimmering under the stars. He continued in a quiet voice, "You and your children are already my family. You belong here, with me. If you still wish it, then yes, I accept." For a moment, Lyra didn't move. Then tears filled her eyes and she covered her mouth with her hand. "You mean it?" she whispered. Reed nodded. "Yes, Lyra, you and the kids are my home now." She stepped closer, trembling slightly, and whispered, "Then I promise, Captain Reed, I will never leave your side." The stars seemed to shine brighter above them. The two children, watching from the doorway, smiled and ran to their mother, wrapping their arms around both of them. Ina laughed and said softly, "Now we are truly a family." Reed placed a hand on each of their heads. "Yes," he said with warmth in his voice. "A family." The following weeks brought hard work, but also happiness. Reed and Lyra built new fences, repaired old machines, and planted more crops. The children helped by fetching water and learning how to care for the soil. Slowly, green began to return to the valley. One afternoon, while Reed was fixing the power unit near the stream, he heard the distant hum of engines in the sky. He looked up sharply. 2 Federation drones were flying overhead, scanning the area. His chest tightened with worry. He rushed back to the cabin. "Lyra," he said, "take the children inside. Drones are scouting the valley." She froze, fear returning to her face. "Will they find us?" "Not if we hide the ship signal," he said quickly. He ran to the back of the cabin and deactivated the beacon he had forgotten to shut down weeks ago. The drones circled once more, scanning the land. For a moment, Reed thought they might descend, but then they turned and disappeared toward the north. He sighed with relief. "We're safe," he said softly. Lyra came out holding the children, her hands trembling. "I thought it was over," she whispered. Reed looked at her seriously. "They'll keep searching the outer zones for a while. We'll have to stay quiet, but they won't find us here." That night, when the danger had passed, they sat near the fire again. The children had fallen asleep, their faces peaceful in the orange glow. Reed and Lyra sat close, speaking quietly. "You protected us again," she said gently. "You always stand between us and the world," Reed smiled. "That's what fathers do." Her eyes softened. "Then you are truly their father now." He looked at the children and then back at her. "I'd be proud to be." The next morning, the valley was calm again. Birds from the southern forests had started to return. The plants Lyra had sown were beginning to sprout small green leaves. The air smelled fresh, full of life. Reed stood watching the sunrise while Lyra came to stand beside him. She placed her hand in his quietly. They didn't speak for a while. Words weren't needed. Everything around them said enough. After so many losses, after so much cold and fear, they had finally found peace. Weeks later, Reed built a wooden marker on a small hill near the stream. It wasn't a grave, but a symbol. On it, he carved words with his old knife. "For those we lost and those we found again." Lyra stood beside him as he finished, holding Ina and Taro's hands. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It speaks of your heart." "Our heart," Reed corrected softly. She smiled. "Then may it stand for us all." The wind blew gently through the valley, carrying the scent of earth and spring. The alien widow who had once begged for a home, the children who had wandered without hope, and the lonely human who had lost everything now stood together as a family. Their past was full of pain, but their future glowed with quiet strength. Reed turned to them, his eyes filled with calm determination. "This valley will be our home," he said. "No one will take it from us," Lyra nodded. "And if they come?" He smiled. "Then they'll learn that peace is stronger than fear." The children laughed and ran toward the stream, their footsteps light on the grass. Lyra watched them with joy and whispered, "They are free now." Reed put his arm gently around her shoulders. "So are we," he said. The sun climbed higher, lighting the snow-capped peaks and melting the last traces of frost. The valley shimmered with new life. And in that moment, Reed knew the journey was over, not because they had reached a destination, but because they had finally found what they were searching for all along. Not just safety, not just shelter, but love, belonging, and peace between two worlds. The human man, the alien widow and her children had built more than a home. They had built a future,